We are going to talk about the audit report. Is that what you are presenting?
Sure. So thank you for having us and for squeezing in yet another workshop today with us. Wanted just to take the time now that we have a couple new board members here on the dais to reconvene and talk about your internal audit function. And as you all know, internal audit reports to the board, just like your attorney does. And through board policy and also in line with best practice for an internal audit function, you all also have an independently assigned audit advisory committee who oversees and governs our function as well, just to add an extra layer of independence from the district. Wanted to take the time to go over with the board the internal audit process here at Osceola Schools overall and how things generally work between the various groups that work together to accomplish the internal audit function. So every single year, and I have some slides here under the deck called Board Workshop. If you want to look at them, they're very high level. We begin every single year with a risk assessment. And your risk assessment is a combination of confidential conversations one-on-one with board members between internal audit and individual board members. Internal audit will also interview the superintendent's office and their senior leadership, and sometimes we will dive down further down the chain and have conversations as well. We also do our due diligence by watching every single one of your board meetings. Yes, you do have a fan club over here at RSM, and we are hardcore. We read budget reports, we read news articles, and we are up to date on what's happening in the industry in the state of Florida. We serve 12 school districts as internal auditors in the state of Florida. So we also have a pulse on what's hard and what's coming for your school districts here in Florida today. Synthesizing all of that information that we gather in the risk assessment, we've produced for you all what we call our top 10 risk to the district assessment, which I have here, and we'll discuss that in just a minute. Every year, we take those top 10 risks and we tell you what the risk is and why, and what we would look at as the internal auditor. That goes before your audit advisory committee. We have a lot of conversation. They are a great committee, as you all know. You've appointed them, or are going to. And they ask questions of me. They ask questions of staff. Sometimes they've done their own due diligence and come up with new questions of their own. And at the end of the meeting, they approve what is going to go before the board as our recommended audit plan for the year. Sometimes Sarah has to help weigh in on budget and things like that to help them decide and prioritize, because we can't always audit all 10. We have to be stewards of district funds and use the funds appropriately and on the biggest risks to the district. So that all took place over the summer. We had some elections. Hello, Mr. Arguello.
Hi.
We had some elections this year and have been waiting for the new board to convene so that we could have this discussion with you about what should be on the audit plan for this particular year. Now, the audit committee has already met. We've had our discussions on the top 10, and they've made the recommendation to the board. We just wanted to, I think all of us, when I say us, I mean everybody, wanted to wait until this board had the opportunity to review and discuss so that we could ensure the board is in line with the Audit Advisory Committee's recommendation so that RSM can move forward producing some audits for you. So with that, before we go any further, I'll pause and just any questions or discussion on the annual process itself or the way that events unfold.
In the calendar year, we are where right now today with that, like for this school year, where are we at right now? We're midpoint? Are we starting?
Yes, so ideally, I like to do the risk assessment at the beginning of the fiscal year so that we can execute the audits during the fiscal year and then see you again in the summer to start our new audit plan. We're a little bit behind normal, but that's okay. We are still going to commit to completing whatever the board needs us to complete by the end of the fiscal year.
You mean our fiscal year, right? From June?
Yes, June 30th.
June
Yes.
to, okay.
Yes, and that's really just so we can keep ahead of the Auditor General. Statute requires the internal audit function, and we want to make sure we're actually delivering an audit so that the Auditor General feels comfortable that, yep, Osceola Schools had an internal audit function that year. So I'm happy to move into the risk assessment for this year if we're ready. Okay, great. I'm gonna flip to,
They have this stuck here.
oh, you're so good. Weiss has summarized it for us because he's very organized. Thank you. Slide 7 of the same deck that we've been looking at summarizes the top 10 high-risk areas from our risk assessment on July 26th of 2022. Now, just a quick note before we really get started on conversation. The risk assessment is always a living and breathing document. Risk always changes as certain things arise. Something might come down from the state, we might have a pandemic, you may find fraud, things come up. And so this is a picture of risk as of July 2022. As the year continues on, if things come into focus for us, for you all, for your audit advisory committee, we all need to be working and collaborating together to make sure that we keep this as updated as possible. So if there's something on the board's mind, something in leadership's mind, something on your audit committee's mind, we need to know about it as well. If I find anything, we all work together and in harmony to make this the most efficient process that it can be. So these top 10 were as of July 2022. I'll stop talking. So number 1 through 3 relate to cybersecurity and privacy. In summary, most of my districts, if not all of them, have been dealing with cybersecurity issues. Public sector over the last couple years, especially during the pandemic, seems to have been targeted at a heightened rate. And we are seeing our clients with an increased activity that is performed by bad actors out there. I'm keeping it public. So we have a relationship with Pete and his team. We've done a little bit of work in the past related to penetration testing. We talked with the audit committee about, is this the right time to take a step beyond just the typical pen testing that we've performed? Is there an opportunity to help the district not only with the pen testing, but also with an incident response playbook? Because we all know it's not am I going to get hacked or am I going to get penetrated? It is when and how, and then how quickly do we respond, and did we respond properly? And that's where that incident response playbook comes into play. Pete and his team have some thoughts, and we'd love to sit around the table. And it's a lot of fun, actually, to do this session. We go through different scenarios live and work through it live to see how the district would respond. And do we have the proper preparedness in place at Osceola? Number 3, social engineering. This is now the human element of that side of the equation. Not only do we have the processes and the technology built out the way that we want, but are our people trained in what to do? Do they understand what a phishing email would look like? Do they understand that if a prince from Africa emails them that they shouldn't be giving out their password? So taking a look at the human element side. I can pause here on the cybersecurity before we move through the remaining top 10. Any thoughts or questions for Pete or I?
I do, but I'll defer to somebody else so that if they have it.
We kind of had discussion on this already. I don't think that 1 through 3 are appropriately placed in the internal audit scheme. I think that this needs to be a function that happens. I mean, look at the FAA, right? They're having trouble. They haven't said that it's a hack, but it happened all over the world in different days, so we kind of know that there's something going on. That needs to be a normal function. I think that we even hired somebody that was supposed to be concentrating on this. So to me, this needs to be taken out of our internal audit scheme, and the other areas here are exactly what internal auditing should be. I mean, because if knowing the weakness and the opportunity for bad actors to come in and touch on the cybersecurity aspect, we're going to be focusing on 1 through 3 every year for the entire existence of the school board, right? And we'll never get through 4 through 10. So it only makes sense that we take that out. We make a plan for that is perpetual, and then we move the internal audit to the places that it has traditionally been focused on. And
Right. I can,
My opinion.
I can agree with Mr. Arguello to a certain degree. And, well, number one, the penetration testing was completed. You know, I remember when I first got on the board, we did a penetration test, and we even had like an executive session for security data purposes. We went over the results. And one of the findings, or one of the recommendations, was that we have a director of cybersecurity. And so we went ahead and implemented that and have a new director of cybersecurity, you know, in place. So, so I think that we've kind of already did the penetration testing. Now, like what Mr. Arguello said, it does need to be kind of follow-ups, but those should be something that, like what he said, it's not like it becomes like this major deal. It almost becomes like baked into what we normally do, like every 3 years, retest the system, so to speak. And the issue, too, with the incident response playbook, now that we have a cybersecurity director and like a department in place, before we test their capabilities, because when I look at an external audit or an internal audit, it's like they're trying to challenge the system that we have in place. I would like to say, let them develop the system they have in place first, because that's something that I would like to follow up with Mr. Thorne's office, since we hired the new director of cybersecurity, or security, I don't know what the title is. Is that correct, cybersecurity?
Information and network security.
Yeah, information and network security. I want to see what their plan is first, before we try to like, you know, poke holes in it. You know, I would like for Mr. Thorne to maybe present that in some future workshop or something like that, and, or maybe if it's a security executive session, you know, because we're not allowed to
Please,
indicate that.
let's do
Yeah.
any technology discussion
Yeah.
on plans for security. Madam Chair, I'd ask you to have a closed meeting on this.
Sure. I would like you, if you don't mind, to expand on what this means. And the reason I'm asking, I'm on the audit committee. I have to because I'm the chair, but also I've developed some of these plans with other organizations, and this tends to be the top for most orgs. So if you can expand on why, because I just, from my standpoint, I disagree that these should not be the top 3. If we don't stay on top of this, there are thousands of people that are going to be exposed, especially children. I was targeted. You know that. Remember when you thought that that was social engineering
Right.
that happened, right?
Right.
So it's happening.
Right.
We are being targeted. Whether or not, you know, it becomes a bigger deal, credit to Mr. Thorne, but these things are not just penetration tests for the sake of penetration tests or incident response, table talk, whatever, social engineering for the sake of doing it. The risk of us as a governmental agency being penetrated and targeted by bad actors is huge. I mean, if you can speak to what happened or what you've seen in the past with other orgs.
Yeah, thank you. I think I had a couple of points, and I just want to make sure I hit all of them. So if I don't sufficiently answer, please let me know if I didn't. So with some of our school districts here in Florida, we have seen, and I'm sure you all are in conversation and have relationships across the state as well, but our districts are losing data. They're losing money, they're losing people, and they're losing assets because they are being targeted in a cyber way, in a way that we haven't seen in years. And these attacks are constantly changing. Everybody is sitting in a room, every bad actor is sitting in a room thinking of ways to hack into these school districts because they know that funding is limited. We don't have Google or IBM level systems, and we can't in most scenarios, so they're great targets. And student data is highly profitable on the deep web. We have teams that scour the deep web for our clients, and we see our clients' data up there for sale all the time. Student data and your staff's data. It is a moneymaker, and so you absolutely are a target. And for that reason, when we come to you or any of our districts as the internal auditor, and remember that internal audit means all risks to the organization. We're not limited just to financial or just to operation. We should be coming to you and to your audit advisory committee and giving you our thoughts on all risks across the district, even cybersecurity. We do have some clients who outsource the auditing function related to cybersecurity, but we are your internal auditors and we can do it. So if you would like us to do it, we are happy and well equipped to do it. I think either way, you're going to have a vendor and it's going to need to be outsourced. It's just a matter of, are you going to put all the eggs under one risk management basket with your internal audit function, or are you going to piece out a chunk over here and give it to another vendor?
Is it a separate department that you have? So is it, to Mr. Arguello's point, if you do another penetration testing, does item, let's say, I'm picking a rabbit out of the hat, let's say number 7, does number 7 then not get done until this is done? Or are they two separate, like, departments within your organization where they can be done in parallel?
Oh, absolutely. We could do all 10 in parallel. We're the 5th largest firm in the world. And I have teams, I could execute these in tandem if that's what the district.
So if they don't have to be done sequentially, in other words?
No, they don't. They don't. The penetration testing, I remember your question about penetration testing. Best practice is to do that every single year because the changes in the targeting and the approach of those bad actors out there. We can perform a pen test and my team may or may not be able to penetrate. And we may need to try completely different methods the following year. So it just keeps Pete well informed about what we're seeing nationally and continuing to challenge the status quo here at Osceola to make sure we have the best defenses of as possible. Go ahead, Pete.
I just want to add in, there's 2 aspects to the penetration test. There's an external test to see who actually get into our network.
Right.
And then there's an internal piece, so if someone does get in, then they laterally move throughout the network, seeing what they can steal. So we want to expand that internal test that occurs.
Now, Mr. Thorne, on your,
Without getting too specific.
now, in your experience, well, I guess public sector is different than private sector. How often do they conduct those penetration tests?
Constantly. So usually these are ongoing every year, these types of tests.
We have some school districts that have asked us to do it on a continuous basis, and we could certainly do that too.
And the other aspect of this is, we don't really want to know when it's happening. That's the other thing.
Right.
So,
I guess the point with that is from the budget perspective from the school board, because we do have internal audits that we would like to look at a particular year, right? And can we concurrently do all 10? But sometimes the budget limits it to that 10.
Yeah.
So, but if we know that cybersecurity is a constant recurring event, then that becomes like not negotiable. Does that make sense? Like, I guess that's where we're kind of leaning toward right now is, do we make that a line item in the budget and say, hey, that's not even considered part of the internal auditing budget? That's called
where I was
cybersecurity penetration testing, and then the leftover monies that we want to allocate for project-specific audits, like we want to look more into construction. So I guess, so in other words, always revisiting cybersecurity, well, if penetration's always doing all the time and it's important, then maybe we need to make it a defined part of our budget where it's not discussed even,
Yeah.
where it's not even in the plan, it's just automatic. We do it every year and you guys constantly have that conversation. I mean, that's for the rest of the board.
That's a different understanding than what I had, actually. I
Yeah.
mean, I would be, that's not the conversation we're having, but as a board, this is so important to me that I would be willing to discuss making that as part of our whatever maintenance.
We just,
whatever.
last time we had the conversation, we had mentioned that already. That's like what we were mentioning, because it doesn't make sense. So basically, we're not gonna do all 10. You guys may have the capacity and the bandwidth, we don't. So we're not gonna do all 10. And if you put 1, 2, 3 cybersecurity every year, and we just go with whatever that you're recommending, then that's the only one that we're gonna get done every year. And that does not benefit the public at all. This should be a line item, and I don't think it necessarily should be RSM every time. It should be a different vendor every year who tries a
Or
different
rotate.
method. They come in, they try to do the testing. I mean, that's what would be more valid. And then the internal audit function serves and continues to function as an internal audit function, as opposed to just, testing whether or not our systems are good, which isn't really internal audit. There's no internal audit. That's just, everybody does the same thing.
I love that idea.
That's a different
So,
conversation
yeah.
altogether.
Yeah, that's. a
I mean,
different
I don't
conversation.
think so,
To make
because right now, this is here. So if we can agree that we're gonna take this out, make a line item, we're gonna go through a process of securing that service, and then we can move on to the discussion to 4 through 10 and what we need to do as an internal audit.
I would just like to expand on your comment, just to make sure that I'm understanding what you're thinking and that maybe that you're understanding what I'm thinking. I do think internal audit should keep up with the cybersecurity posture of the district. It's our responsibility to monitor the risks at the district and report back to you all. Cybersecurity is one of the bigger ones. completely okay if the district wants to outsource the auditing function of that. I would just need to make sure I understand what that other firm is doing, and are they looking at the things that we think are risky, so that I can then report back to you, yeah, they did a pen test, but they didn't even test A, B, and C, which we know is an issue. Does that make sense?
That's exactly along my line. So the auditing function portion would be auditing the service and checking to make sure that that was an appropriate
Yes.
penetration test, as opposed to you just doing the penetration testing, which is a service. That's not an internal audit, that's a service, right? And the incident response playbook, that could be, that's an internal audit function, right? But every year, now we're gonna be performing the same three. It's no longer, now the internal audit of the entire district is no longer being serviced,
And budgetarily, though, I do think it will still end up being an additional expense in the budget.
Yeah.
It's just, where if you put it under internal audit or if you put it outsourced, I think my responsibility and our responsibility to you all is to monitor that that outsourced vendor, if that's who you go with, is looking at the right things. Go ahead, Pete.
And so I absolutely agree with you regarding oversight. So that was an oversight function of RSM for number one. Regarding items 2 and 3, I think those do need to occur every so often, not every year. We don't have to do 2 and 3 every year. But I need someone to, again, look at what we've done regarding the IRP or the incident response plan that we currently have. We are working with another vendor to create some additional documentation, but I need someone to review that. So that stuff, as well as what we're doing with Note before with our social engineering or our phishing campaigns. I need someone really to take a look at that. We're doing what we feel we need to do as a best practice. So that's where I'm coming from for 2 and 3.
Well, but we hired somebody, right? They should have the room to create the systems that they're gonna be checking, right? Like he was saying. And upon completion of that, you can go into stage 2, which would be having all this stuff reviewed, right, by an outside vendor. And then on year 3, you have RSM do the internal audit, which would be normal. And then you go back to year 1, and then you go to year 2 and year 3 and so on. Because my concern is that it's not technology driven. This is only a portion of what we do here. Nothing else is being internal audited, right? So
just some numbers for thought. In our industry, and in public sector specifically, the typical guideline for spend on IT-related concerns is 30% of your internal audit budget. So we haven't been doing too much the last few years. We've had some really heavy operational focus. We've done a pen test each year, which is a small portion of the budget. And that's part of the discussion at the audit committee level. They thought now was the time to invest in IT, allow management on the district side to fix some of the things that we found in the operational audits, give them some time to put in their remediation plan. We'll go focus on Pete, and then next year maybe start with an audit plan that's balanced at 30% IT, 70% operational, which is in line with national industry standards.
Right, because one thing I did appreciate that I heard also is if the penetration is going to be done every year. So thank you, Mr. Thorne, for delineating the fact that 1, 2, and 3 don't have to be annual. 2 and 3 can be every 2 years, every 3 years. But it sounds like number 1 may be annual. I like the idea of RSM and like another vendor rotating the penetration test itself. And I don't even need you to audit the penetration tester. I like the fact that everyone uses different techniques, because your technique for conducting a penetration test may be a little bit different than somebody else, which is okay, because in real life, the hackers aren't going to all share the same capabilities to attack. So, so to me, kind of round robining back and forth. So it's not even the integrity of the tester, it's just that, hey, you get just a different test. So I don't mind RSM year 1 doing the penetration test. Some other vendor doing the penetration year 2. Then year 3, you guys do it again. Then year 4. So it's not always the same tester all the time, because then you just fall into that trap. Like, kind of where things are, so your brain's like psychologically going to go there to look for something. But if you're like a new person looking at it, you're going to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And if you don't know what the prior person did, that's the whole point. I don't want you looking at what the prior penetration tester did and looking at what they did, because then it's going to taint your ability to do the new test. I want you to do a test based on the new systems that we set up. That's the whole purpose of security. You know what I mean? It's like, kind of like not knowing what you're doing. So if I'm going to have an external penetration tester, I don't want the sharing of the data between the two penetration testers.
I wonder if we can table this conversation,
Yeah.
because it just sounds like it's a bit, there's
Specific.
a lot, right? And I'm sure that the other board members, Ms. Cahoon and Ms. Booth, have a lot to ask as well. But we, typically when we have this conversation, we never get past 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we
Okay.
can maybe have a little bit more of a conversation around the others.
Okay.
During the time that we have available.
There-
Is that
there's-
okay?
Yes, ma'am. There's 2 of them that we kind of spoke about before that aren't included on here that I would like to see, like, maybe we can, because the stimulus funds is there, right? But when we spoke about the healthcare plan, we did a plan audit on the makeup of the plan, you know, like, how's it set up? But we're not actually auditing the expenditures of the plan, you know, and there's 2 different types of expenditures. There's the clinic itself, because we have so many relationships with people. We have a pharmacist or whatever. We have a lot of different moving parts, and we're paying vendors a different amount for each thing. Every now and then, I would like a financial audit. You know what I mean? Not even a process audit, but just saying, hey, you know, every month that health clinic is spending so many dollars on buying equipment on our behalf, because everything's a pass-through expense. They're not spending their internal dollars, you know what I mean? So are we matching the requisite every month to the expenditures? You know, when they said, hey, we bought 3 desks, did somebody look in there and see, did we get 3 desks? And did they spend the amount of money that they were on those 3 desks if we bought 2 pills? So I think that the health clinic is spending a lot of money that is not being audited for that. And then there's the other component of that is the claims expense, because we spoke about that. Now, that may not be something that you guys had a specialty to do, but, you know, actually looking at the healthcare bill to third-party providers. Because the first one was just the internal clinic and what we spend as our own healthcare clinic, right? But then there's like, you know, let's say Ms. Calhoun goes to see a doctor and the doctor submits a bill to us. We have a third-party provider that's supposed to look at that bill, verify the charges, and then submit the bill and get claimed, you know, get paid for it, right? So, they don't audit themselves. You know what I mean? So if it's not you guys, then every now and then, you know, I would like to say, like, on every 3 years, kind of like double check and make sure that, hey, are those claims being processed correctly? Because I was told that we were in a lawsuit with the prior one. I think it was Aetna or Humana or something like that. Or Cigna, yeah, I'm sorry, I got so many names in my head. That there was some claims issues. So rather than waiting to it to bubble up, that to me, that's the whole purpose. And it doesn't have to be like a full-on audit. Like you do like some random samples, you know what I mean? You kind of limit the scope. And if you don't see nothing, then you don't keep going. But if only if you see something, you scale it out further.
Can I ask, would that have come up while you were assessing your risk areas? That
It has, and I'll tell you why it's not on here. So the timing of this was in July. We had just issued that health plan report just a matter of a couple months earlier.
Right.
One of the big findings that we had in that, I don't want to call it finding, big recommendations that we had in that report was to develop a risk mitigation plan for that health plan. So that includes not only your claims audits, pharmacy and medical, but also taking a look at vendor management practices within the district and within each other, as well as the data security, because they're transferring a lot of sensitive data among different vendors. So there were several audits that we would like to see brought into a regular rotation. And the district was working on building out that audit plan, and I do believe that there is going to be some forthcoming discussion.
There has been conversation for several months about doing a claims audit, and especially with that, the termination of Aether as our third-party administrator, which was as of September 30th. So we have spoken a lot about whether this belongs in internal audit. Matt Dubnansky, who we brought in as our kind of healthcare specialist expert, he's proposed a scope for a claims audit, and we have a contract already in place with him with a not to exceed amount for his consulting work. So my recommendation would be that we allow him to go ahead and proceed with that claims audit.
So similar to the layout that you suggested with cyber, having somebody else come in and take a look, that's what we're doing here. Somebody else is coming in and taking a look at the claims, and then we will keep up with the results of that claim audit, make sure that we feel like the risk is being monitored and managed appropriately, and if it's not, then we'll continue to have conversation as we follow up on that health plan report. That's why it's not on this particular top 10, because it was in the works with another vendor.
Oh, I didn't
Doesn't
know that
need
was
to-
in the works.
Connected to that
It
original.
also doesn't need to hit the internal audit budget. That's something we can fund through our health plan.
Like as part of the health plan expenses, you know, making sure the health plan
management of
itself
the
is
health
made
plan,
whole.
any audits on the health plan
But it's absolutely an area on our radar that we keep up with and follow very closely.
Now, my only concern is, this is the first time I've heard of it, which is kind of good that it's happening. Then I kind of want to like go through like an RFP process for the selection of that internal auditor, because I have to have a high degree of assurance. So it's like for us to pre-pick somebody without us looking at anybody, because those are some pretty important things. You know what I mean? So, and that's something that the board has a direct function of. You know, that's not even a superintendent thing. The internal audit function belongs statutorily, specifically with the authority of the board. So that just brings up something that I don't feel comfortable with, that the staff is choosing.
Well, there's some
who the
language
internal
related to
audit.
professional services giving you a little bit of flexibility, but I'm
Right.
sure your procurement director can walk through that with you all so that you're comfortable.
Yeah, that's up to the board if you guys want to go through an RFP process for that particular audit. The board would just need to just make that decision, talk about what scope you want, and then direct staff to
Right.
execute an RFP process.
So, but you said for third-party claims, do we have one also for the expenditures of the health clinic itself?
We haven't done a specific engagement. The financial aspect of our health plan is included in our overall financial audit. So that has been opined on through our regular
Yeah,
auditor
because that's
general
not-
audit.
Yeah, but I want like an actual, like an audit of the financials, like somebody looks at the receipts, looks at the payments and making sure that their payments were going to where they're supposed to go.
So again, I just need to know the specific scope of what this board is wanting to look at.
Okay, I'll draw it up in an email then, and we'll share it up with the board. Because
And
rather
we
than
can
taking,
talk
we have a lot of
offline.
time, I don't want to take
And
up.
is there a
Talk
board
offline.
consensus to do an RFP for that particular audit?
I think it would make sense just because of the timing, that 1, 2, 3 go out to bid, and that we focus on 5, which is just a gigantic concern around the country for us not to do that with the timing. Follow that enormous amount of money that was sent here and follow those expenditures, I think would be certainly a disservice to our public. 9, which again, just provides our public with the reassurances after the tremendous amount of money that was spent. And 4, so 5, 9, 4.
We had proposed doing the top 3 and doing follow-up based
Now-
on the budget assigned.
I'm coming in here now as from November. Now, I just need to know, are all of these risk areas being looked at and done right now?
No.
That's what I need to know, like, what has the history, I mean, it's hard to do this quickly in a workshop, but before I move to take things off and put things on, I need to know, are we doing all of these? If not, is 10 too much? Is 10 the standard that we look at? Where did 10 even come from? Like, is that something that's statutorily we have to do, or how does that work?
Yeah, good point.
So,
So,
great question. How many audits can we do practically a year?
so
That's a
it's
great
budget
question.
dependent,
Yeah.
depending on the resources that the board wants to assign to internal audit. These are top 10, and we pulled 10. That's an RSM list for you. It's not statute, it's not driven by anything else. We wanted the board and the audit committee to have sufficient choice to understand where the top 10 risks were and make the decision on where to allocate the resources this year. So not every one of these will get done. They will not all get done. But what we do is continue to have conversation every single year and track what's been on our list. It has not been done. We do that through this, so that we can continue to remind the audit committee and the board where we see risk, but maybe haven't taken a look yet.
One consideration, of course, is audit fatigue too. When we talk about should we do all 10, one thing you want to consider is are we burning out the teams that we'll have to interact with? Certainly from an accounting perspective, that could be a big toll on their team in an already difficult environment. So timing is important for these as well.
Stimulus funding is a high risk, and we are seeing some issues in other districts. At this district in particular, shortly after we issued this risk assessment, the state called Sarah's office and said that they were going to be taking a look at stimulus expenditures. So we did want to wait and see the results of the state's audit and see if they had any concerns that internal audit needed to pick up the torch on.
Yeah,
But-
that was my concern too. I was thinking about delaying the stimulus look, because I felt like even the federal government, because they gave us a lot of money too, may want to do their own audit. But I don't know. I mean, I'm depending on you. Are you hearing any rumblings from the federal government conducting an own audit on?
Through the state so far, not the feds directly yet.
Yeah, the DOE monitoring is just about done. We're still going back and forth on some additional documentation, but no significant issues have come out of that. But the final report hasn't been issued yet. Our regular federal single audit has looked at that for the last fiscal year. No issues arose out of that, and that'll continue to be looked at every year as long as we're spending these dollars, just due to the magnitude of it. So that was part of the discussion previously with, it may not be the highest risk, even though it is high risk, but because there's already multiple audits going on over those funds.
And we would like to see those results, and then if we see a need to expand the conversation with the board and say, hey, the results of this audit weren't what we thought it was going to be, we really think RSM should be coming in and expanding scope and really finding out what's going on. That will be the next conversation.
These areas, how much does the audit committee drive these conversations or take information from what's happening in staff, all of that? Is that the structure how it's brought back to the board? This is what they recommend as the top 10 on the committee? What's the role, I guess, of the committee itself versus these top 10 areas?
Typically, boards will grant the audit advisory committee the authority to approve the audit plan on their behalf. We hope that the board has conversation with their appointees and can have the opportunity to catch up as needed, but we also love to have this annual workshop directly with you all and talk a little bit about the board's concerns. We also ask every year to meet with each one of you individually, so if we have some concerns that are maybe confidential in nature, we can also have the chance to discuss that as well. So it's an ongoing communication between all parties. We like to see the audit advisory committee have that authority to approve the audit plan only because they are independent of the board. So it makes for a truly independent function. But we also love when our boards want to talk to us as well. So this is all great communication as well. Would you like me to talk about any of these further?
9 and 4, I have interest in. If we delay 5 until the current audit is complete, till that report comes out, 9 and 4.
Sure. So number 4, operations, maintenance services, and work order processes. Recently, we completed an audit over in the facilities division, and maintenance is a really nice segue and phase 2 to that work. But maintenance inherently has risk because of the types of contracts that are being run through are usually very similar to facilities but smaller. There's a lot of ability for parts and pieces to just not go the way that they're supposed to. And also, we also like to take a look at equity of the work order process. I know in some districts, the work order process is a big topic of interest to board members. They want to know, are my schools getting fixed in the order that we've submitted, or are we picking other pieces of the county? And just taking a look at how does that actually flow can give the board some comfort and the constituents some comfort as well on the whole process of maintaining our facilities for our students. Number 9, contract compliance. This is where we start taking a look at a contract once it's gone through that procurement office and has gone through the competitive selection and is handed off to the department to administer. We take a look at it from there. So is that department upholding the vendor to the terms and conditions of the contract that the district signed with it? Are they reviewing the invoices properly? Are they ensuring that the vendor is delivering on what they're supposed to be delivering? We take a look there and just make sure that each department has processes and procedures in place to manage some high-risk contracts.
And then perform some detailed testing of sample contracts to validate that those procedures are operating effectively.
Yeah, just because they say there's a procedure in place doesn't mean it's being
Correct.
implemented.
So we had a recommendation from the audit committee with some guidance from Sarah on what the budget allotment was for this year. They had recommended 1 through 3 as well as follow-up. I haven't talked about follow-up yet, but briefly, every single year we will go back and look at our open audits and test to make sure that management has remediated the things that we identified in our audit. And we do formally report back to the audit committee and to you the status of each of those, so you can see if management did what they said they would do, or if they're working on it, or if it's not started yet. That needs to be conducted every single year. So we did have that scheduled this year, as well as those 3 cybersecurities. So I know that in a workshop, we're not making decisions necessarily, but I think the next step would be to understand the board's decision on if we're moving forward with the Audit Advisory Committee's recommendation for the audit plan, or if they would like to come up with the audit plan different than what the Audit Advisory Committee had recommended.
So I think I have 2 questions in relation to it. So I know there's been a lot of discussion of moving 1, 2, 3 off of this and somewhere else, but you did mention earlier too that we are on a shortened time frame during this audit window. So is there, because of that and the, budget that we have available for us this time to go forward with 1 through 3 and then move the priority to take that off moving forward and focus on the other areas that we said? I just don't know with this shortened window. Like, is it our next audit window that it would be better to really focus in on these new areas? I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm in favor of, like you said, I think based on what Sarah said earlier, that we did a claims audits under the healthcare trust fund, pot of fund, whatever money that comes from, right? I believe that we should move this over to the IT department budget. So when we craft our IT budget at the end of every year, we should put there, part of it is, auditing the IT department itself, so it doesn't count into the accounting. Is that gonna be a problem, Sarah?
No, it's not a problem at all, and I mean, it can still stay, it's a line item's a line item, you can call it whatever you wanna call it, so it's just a matter of what do you guys wanna set that overall budget at going forward for next year. So right now, it's $150,000 for internal audit services. Next year, you could say we want it to be $200,000 and include these IT aspects, or you could say we want to move X amount of money into a separate IT line item, and then we want our internal audit budget to be whatever. So it's just a conversation of where you guys want to allocate them.
Yeah, because I like the concept of moving 1 and 3 under the IT budget, because that's part of the fidelity there, because it's kind of like what you said, even psychologically, if we have 150,000 every year to do internal audits, just internal audits, I feel like, oh, we really don't, because part of it's being constricted. But if we can create a pot of funding for the service that's generating that need, especially if cybersecurity is going to be constant, then I think it needs to be part of the IT budget. So let's say we want to buy 10,000 new computers, and we're like, oh, wait a second, we only can afford 9,000 because that other 1,000 are being consumed by the internal audit function. You know what I'm trying to say? I think it's better to just kind of categorize the audit with that cybersecurity and limit IT's budget. I don't want to limit our ability to internal audit everything else because IT is consuming so much of it.
I think that's a great idea to consider for next year. But we're in January and they haven't done anything. Am I correct? Correct. Yeah.
So anything for this year, so we need to hurry up and
Right.
choose something for
And
them to
I
do.
think that the list, unless folks have other ideas,
Right.
this is the list.
Okay.
And we pick from this list, knowing that we will not be, in my opinion, again, we're not going to move, we can't actually move cybersecurity away from this yet. So this is the list that we have.
Okay.
Do we want to accept what the audit committee has proposed and have them start with their work, which is what I'm proposing, and then
Okay.
understand that we are moving some of this out, and we have the baseline for how and why we want to do that. But again, I think that you guys have been waiting for a while for consensus from us.
What
So
is,
let's,
so let me put my brain in that thought process, and I like what you're saying. What is the internal audit budget right now for this?
$150,000 is what has been set aside in the current year budget. The risk assessment was $30,000, and then our proposal was, which we had brought to the board back in October, was to do 1, 2, and 3 related to cybersecurity. Along with, they had proposed some follow-up work with a not-to-exceed amount of $30,000.
So how much is 1, 2, and 3 costing us? Let's put a dollar amount to what?
$72,400.
So now
1,
it's,
2, and 3.
so 150 minus 72, then,
So you could say about half of the budget would be IT in the current year.
all right, see, that's where it's already, so now it's leaving us with 75. How much is the follow-ups doing? Because I do like that concept of following up to make sure that what we did do was implemented.
And it's required of any internal audit function.
And how much are those follow-ups?
Yeah.
Those proposed follow-ups for this
Was
year?
it 30?
Proposal was not to exceed 30.
Yeah.
Not to exceed
And
30.
depending on what you're able to do. and
Yes,
what's
we'll
followed
have
on.
5 reports to follow up on, and I think.
Yeah, it'll
with 30.
depend on when we, this page right here, page 12, highlights what is open as a follow-up item. So what we will be doing is reaching out to them to understand how many of these items have been remediated. And if they have been, if there's been a management action plan, a change in process, at that point, we would test to make sure that those are operating as they're intended to, they meet the risk.
Let's assume it's 30, because it could possibly be a little bit less, but just for expediency, so now that leaves us with 45,000. What can I get for 45,000?
We did a risk
Which one of these,
assessment. We did
get
a
us the
risk
other reality?
assessment For 30. So we did a risk assessment for 30. So 30 plus the 72 plus another 30 for follow-up. So we're at 130.
Oh, risk assessment
Yes.
was its own.
Yes, it's part of your internal audit function every year, doing a risk assessment.
Oh, just doing this presentation?
Yes.
And
Just
follow-up,
saying, hey,
both
just-
annual. Yeah.
Yes,
Well, it's not just a presentation, it is the assessment of the.
we had many interviews and we read a lot of documents and did a lot of homework.
Well, hey, it hasn't even was anything. We can't do anything this year then.
I
Yeah,
think
we're
you can
doing
do
1, 2, 3.
three
It's
projects.
No, but that's
not-
not, that's actually, it's
We
not
haven't
really
moved
internal.
those away from.
We already
here.
did
That would be additional funding, right?
And-
Yeah,
That
so
you
we
would
get to
be pushing
really don't
IT,
get
so
to
it's
do our
money.
pet
Follow-
project, audit,
I'm
is what
sorry.
I'm saying.
I apologize. And follow-up is testing. I'm going to be retesting timekeeping, purchasing, HR, and design and construction. So we are doing some auditing in 4 different areas during the year.
So, so 4 through 10, we're not even look at it, we don't have any money for it, so it's a moot conversation. So either that, or does the board want to amend the budget to allocate more money to do anything? Because technically, 4 through 10 can't get done. So
Or we don't do 1,
everything's
2,
already-
3,
everything's already
1, 2,
accounted
3,
for.
and we do something else. I mean, that's what I'm in favor. I'm not in favor of doing 1, 2, 3. I've only been here 2 years, and we've done 1, 2, 3 already twice, so,
We've done number 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in favor of keeping the list as is. So we're not taking a vote, but I would like consensus. Who is in favor of keeping the list as is?
well, do we need to vote on this? Is this something that we
No,
vote
but
on?
they do need direction.
I'm going with the committee's recommendation at this point until, and it's fluid too, as we're voting tonight on our committee, because coming in, I need to, and at the time of the year that we're at right now, I do see some changes that need to be made. As of today, right now, I'm going with my committee's recommendation for what we're gonna do. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and next year, we're just gonna have to bump up the budget a little bit, because unfortunately, 150 is not getting the job done.
We can, yeah, and also consider that 3 of these are not, based on the conversation, they're not even going to be on this list anymore, so. we're
Yeah,
moving
they're gonna be on the
forward.
list again.
Say what?
They're gonna be on the list again.
I thought we said they were moving that to IT, not to, did I misrepresent that? Is that right? Is that what I heard?
Now, does IT have the
Right.
budget to absorb it? That's another question. If we,
But that
just because we
is
move it over there,
today.
are you,
I'll have to look at that piece of it, but 2 and 3 will not be on there anyway next year. So, because we had talked about doing it every couple of years. But 1 really does need to be done.
so I guess if you give me that assurance, Mr. Thorne, make me feel better, to at least know that when you create your budget going on in the future, if you can add, a line item for internal audit function, whether it's penetration testing or whatever, just call it audit. I don't want to micromanage what you do. You know what I mean? But just moving forward, so that way we know as a board then when we have to discuss our 1 through 10, we're not including penetration testing because it's included in your budget.
Well, and I can only assume too is 6 months from now, I mean, I know this was done a year ago because you said this was done in July, but 4 through 10 are going to show back up on this list. And then we're just gonna have 3 others that are being added now that we're taking these off. So the need to do the assessment in these areas will be there.
Yeah, but in my experience, the top 3 that always come out of our audit committee are benign. So, and I just, so, I mean, either, the audit committee, to say that we're gonna do cybersecurity every time is very easy. That's the,
We're literally
Very-
saying the opposite of that. We're
Okay,
literally
if I
moving
may.
it out.
if I may, you and I may differ of opinion on this, that's fine, right? But there's always gonna be a benign 1, 2, 3, in my opinion, because that's what I've seen since I've been here. So when I've talked to the audit committee, an organization that truly wants transparency goes with the things that are harder first. Those are the things that are prioritized. You prioritize where there's money being lost or where there's a high level of assessment. And we already know that this is a high level of risk with technology, so then you immediately go and you address that separately. But what we're doing is creating a situation where we know that there's a high risk thing up front, and we're going to stick with that, and we're going to abandon everything else when there's still high level of risk there. So I don't
understand how.
I just think
we
that they
will
could
continue
all
to
be
have
done.
3 moot points. If those 3 are going away, those 3 that you said have been at the forefront since you started, if those are going away and going to be handled separately, then the others will come through to the forefront, especially when we talked earlier about valuing our committees that we've appointed and assigned and whatnot, and what they're giving us information on. If that's what they're giving us, this is where we need to focus our efforts.
Okay.
That's the part I just am not
Yeah,
understanding.
I disagree, but that's fine.
I'll just add that these are the high-risk areas, right? Like, this is going to change. And part of the reason why these top 3 might change is because if they're already being addressed through a separate budgetary item and they're already being reviewed, they wouldn't rise to the same level of risk, from our opinion, likely on this. Is it a risk? It'll always be a risk. IT will always be the number 1 risk. But if it's not being addressed, it needs to be, and that's why we included it.
All right, then once we address it, I'll reserve my judgment till next year, so I kind of defer a little bit more to Ms. Cahoon. I'm like, okay, this is where we are, let's roll, and then the next year, we just need to revisit it
Yeah.
and then say, okay, where's that
Just to
part?
confirm, once the audit committee approves or comes up with their top 10, do we not get the list during the following board meeting so that we can look at it and discuss?
Yes, so the
Okay.
report that RSM issued that you have in your hands today was given to the board
Yeah.
right after that, right after it was completed.
We also, I think, had our SOWs attached for board approval,
I
which
just
was
looked,
the
it
way
was
of communicating.
October 18th is when we had put
Yeah.
those together, so what I'll do is I'll just put that back on your next school board agenda for approval to move forward with this recommendation.
So what we received at the last school board meeting was just the recommendations and the statement of work and so on for approval. We didn't have the discussion, and we had not agreed that these were the things that we were going to do. So that's the problem. So, we were already fed these things, and that's what we're doing.
Typically,
Some
best
people like to,
practice- I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, it's fine, go ahead.
The Audit Advisory Committee typically has the authority at other districts to make the recommendation to the board about what's on the audit plan. I think if Osceola wants to have a different process and maybe more board input up front, I would suggest doing an annual workshop joint with the Audit Committee and the board, and let's hammer out the risk assessment and the audit
I
plan
like that idea.
together.
We're trying.
Going forward, just a suggestion.
Madam Chair, can I say one thing before you guys wrap up, back on the claims audit? I would like to recommend, because we want to have that looked at during this run-out period with Aether, our prior TPA, which is a 6-month run-out period, and we've already kind of put it on hold. Staff wants to request that we get going on that, if we can let our consultant do that work right now, since there's a little bit of a time crunch, and then we can move back into a bigger comprehensive look at of an audit with our health plan with some of the additional scope, and maybe do an RFP for additional scope audit going forward. But I just want to make sure we're not stalling on using this time period while we're still in this run-out period.
You just want to
which is
look
gonna
at Aether's
expire
claims.
in March.
Okay. I can agree with that.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
If it's all right with the board, when I ran audit for Orange County and for the virtual school, we were penetrated, the virtual school, and in working with the FBI, they have an expert in Orlando on cybersecurity, and what I'd ask permission of the board to contact him and have him, if he would, meet with Dr. Pace and Mr. Thorne, because he had a lot of thoughts and ideas based upon what they were experiencing and seeing that are different than the auditors, because they were on the front line of trying to deal with the people who are penetrating. It's just another layer of resource, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, in preparation for next year. Okay, sounds like, do you have what you need from us?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
What other questions do we have, team? Okay, so, we're gonna break.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the direction.
comments to the two. Sarah's gonna attach it to their next agenda, so they'll, so they've like read already.
Len.
You don't need to pretend.
Out of school districts. Yeah, we do. Oh, good. Yeah, out of the school districts that have an internal auditor full-time, do they still engage occasionally to do some stuff that